Thank you so much for joining us today. We are here with our first in a series of grant writing workshops. One of the reasons that we're doing this is because we want to ensure that organizations and businesses are successful, which is the mission of Legacy Business League. Normally, we are helping startup businesses or existing business be successful, but of course, that does not exclude nonprofits and organizations that need assistance through grant writing. We've developed a wonderful partnership with Hancock Whitney Bank. This is actually the brainchild of Anthony Montgomery. I am Angie Juzang. I'm the co-founder and chair of Legacy Business League. And we are facilitating the series on behalf of Hancock Whitney because we have a great reach within our database and we want to continue within our mission to help people be successful. So on the screen are many of our panelists. We're going to allow Anthony to go ahead and give some sponsor remarks and tell us why he came up with this and developed this and what we have in store.
Good morning, and thank you all for joining us today for another Hancock Whitney sponsored virtual event. I'm Anthony Montgomery, Senior Vice President, Director of Community Development with Hancock Whitney Bank. First, I'd like to thank all of our expert panelists and the Legacy Business League for working together to bring you today's great event. Today, we're going to kick off part one of a three-part series, a comprehensive grant writing roundtable workshop with the expert. Over the past several years, as I've visited many community-based organizations, I've often heard and been asked, how can I get more funding? How can I find more grant programs? What can I do to increase our chances of being awarded a grant? Well, today we're going to find the answers to some of those questions. Not only are you going to find out how I can find a grant or how you can find a grant, how and where to apply, how to avoid some of the most common mistakes and pitfalls of grant writing, and information about government grants, foundation grants, specialty grants, and information about the Federal Home Loan Bank grants that Hancock Whitney also is a sponsor of. Did you know over the past 3 years, Hancock Whitney has sponsored a competitive grant writing program facilitated by the Greater New Orleans Foundation, and we've awarded over $250,000 in each of the past 3 years, okay? During this series, I will be providing more information and will serve as a moderator from a reviewer's perspective. And I will also be monitoring the Q&A box for questions to get information and put it in the parking lot if those questions will be answered later on in more appropriate series in a more appropriate method in a later series. So today we're going to kick off this workshop to try to provide you a little bit more information on not only how you can win more grants, but you're going to hear from some of the best experts on writing grants, how to improve and tell your story. Because often from a reviewer's perspective, when I'm reviewing a grant application, I don't want to just hear your story. I want to hear the impact of how your organization is helping those in the community and how many. Because one story makes a small difference, but the more people we help, the more reach we have, the more impact we'll have on our communities. So with that being said, I want to turn it over and let the panelists introduce themselves, and we're going to kick it over to Ms. LaCarsha.
Okay, thank you so much, Anthony. My name is LaCarsha Babers, and I'm the Community Development Officer for Hancock Whitney Bank. I've been in banking for over 21 years. Of those 21 years, I've been in the community development sector for about 15. And I must say that I have one of the most rewarding and most fulfilling positions here in the bank. Number one, because I'm a giver, I love to give, and I'm able to reach out to individuals and help improve their standard of living, help improve their lives. My role here at Hancock Whitney Bank as the Community Development Officer is to, number one, develop and strengthen relationships with community partners whose primary mission involves either affordable housing, economic development, community development services to low to moderate income individuals, as well as revitalization and stabilization. And of those many community partners that we have, one of our partners is with Federal Home Loan Bank of Dallas. And our partnership with Federal Home Loan Bank of Dallas has been with over 21 years, and it actually gives us an opportunity to provide grant funding for applicants. Our partnership, we apply for those grant applications. And once those applications are reviewed and approved, we're able to pass those fundings on to individuals who qualify. And you'll hear more about the grant application process later throughout the presentation, the series of presentations that will be hosted. Some of those topics will include the program overview, required documentation, income verification. And I do want to say this about income verification. If it's 2021, we do want to avoid submitting income from 2019. It's very important to make sure that information is updated and it's current and it's accurate. We will also talk about the availability of funding. We'll talk about the funding process. And one thing we do want to avoid is bypassing the members. Hancock Whitney is a member of the Federal Home Loan Bank of Dallas, and we're here to help you, walk you through the application process. So we encourage you to avoid bypassing us and reaching out to Federal Home Loan Bank directly, because we're here to help you. We want to make the process as easy as possible. And many times it slows Federal Home Loan Bank down, and they would love to hear from you, but it slows the application approval process down when we bypass the member to ask those questions. Again, many of these topics and others will be discussed throughout our presentation, the series of grant writing presentations. So stay tuned. You'll hear a lot of information about the various types of grants that are offered through Federal Home Loan Bank of Dallas. And we'll also talk about the making sure we know what those timelines are. Many of the grant applications are opened in January, and you'll have an entire year to apply for those grants as long as funding is available. But there's a small window for a few of our grants. And so we ask you to really pay attention, really stay abreast to those deadlines and required dates. Again, my name is LaCarsha Babers. I'm looking forward to the grant writing series, and I'm excited to hear more from the panelists.
Thank you, LaCarsha. And what we're going to do is send out kind of the topics to this group, especially. So again, we're recording this, so please make sure that you put something in the chat so we can record those chats too, so we know that you are here. And she's going to play a more significant role in the upcoming ones based on what she just said, as we kind of help you shape your narrative, prove your outcomes, and justify your finances. Then she's going to wrap it all up in a neat little bow and tell you how to submit it, when to get the deadlines, and make sure that you qualify. So as part of our Hancock Whitney sponsors and representation today, we also have Miss Ashley Aubrey Harrison. If you would introduce yourself and tell us what your role is in the grant application process at Hancock Whitney.
Sure. Thank you so much to Legacy. Thank you to our wonderful speakers, Ms. Sarah Taylor and Mrs. Betty Fletcher, for allowing us this opportunity to bring very instrumental information to the communities that we serve. I am happy to be a part of the team that just spoke. Quite frankly, I feel like I don't need to say anything more. They've really hit the nail on the head in terms of why we're here and what our aim is and what we're able to provide. So my role here at the bank, I get an opportunity to sort of play both sides of the fence, if you will. I serve as the Community Affairs and CRA Manager. So I get on one end to, as Anthony and LaCarsha alluded to, work with wonderful organizations like many of the folks that are on this call, as well as to work with our internal business partners on strategies and initiatives that can help us to do more with our resources and to find other unique ways to collaborate. What I would like to say is listen very carefully, everyone that's on the call. LaCarsha has already brought forth good information in terms of things to keep in mind as you're writing grants. One, she said, pay attention to deadlines. That's key. If you don't make the deadline, you have no shot at attaining the dollars, right? The other thing she said, know your partners. These are things that are going to come up continuously throughout these next set of workshops. Knowing who you're partnering with, knowing who your funder is, those things are essential in total fund development. Some of what I'll be discussing as we get into the later workshops are all about your organization structure, how to tell your story, knowing who your ambassadors are, and making sure that they too are telling your story. I look forward to speaking with everyone and sharing all of that. My almost 20 years of working in community development and financial services has allowed me to learn. Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, well, now we're going to go into talking more in depth with two folks that I was very impressed by the bio. If I ever need to write a grant, y'all are the people that I'm coming to for sure. We're going to start with Miss Sarah Taylor. She is a nonprofit grant writer and strategic planning consultant. If you would please introduce yourself, and then we'll let Dr. Fletcher introduce herself, and then we're going to double back to you so you can share some slides with us.
Perfect. Good morning. Thank you, Legacy and Hancock Whitney. I'm happy to be here with you today. My name is Sarah Taylor. I'm a principal with Impact Strategies and a consultant with Susan Brunner and Associates. My key areas of focus are fundraising, grant writing, and strategic planning for nonprofits. For the past 2 decades, I've worked with nonprofits and community development financial institutions to try to help them achieve scale and sustainability through grant funding. I have prior experience working for nonprofits, including a small business technical assistance provider, which primary focus was minority and women entrepreneurs. Over the past 2 decades, I've successfully helped clients write grants for projects ranging from bricks and mortar to an outdoor culinary food incubator, a healthy food financing revolving loan fund, and multiple grants relating to economic development. My primary area of expertise is federal grant writing. I've done a lot of foundation work as well, but mainly I focus on the federal grants, so CDFI, SBA, EDA, DRA, all the acronyms. And I look forward to connecting with everyone today.
And Dr. Fletcher, of course, certainly not last but not least, we want to get your introduction, and then we'll double back to Miss Sarah. You're on mute. The famous words since March of 2020.
Yes, thank you very much for that. And thank you for allowing me, you and Anthony, to be a part of this experience. I'm Betty Ward Fletcher, and I currently serve as the senior principal with Professional Associates, Inc. That we call it PAI. It is a research and evaluation firm. We do work in the area of strategic planning, but primarily we are evaluators. That's dear to my heart. So much of the work that we do is grounded in research, but I started my career in grant writing. I was invited to serve on a grant for 1 year, and that 1 year turned into 35 years. And many of those, for the first 10 of them, in order for me to keep my paycheck, I had to write the grant every year. So I had a personal motivation. So that's sort of how I got into this whole area of grant writing. The motto of our organization, Professional Associates, is our mission is your success, period. That's why we do what we do, because we want to see organizations be successful. And grant writing is one of the ways that we help organizations to be successful. I have written grants. That's how I started my career. Then I got into actually a period in my career where I was giving out the money rather than trying to get it. And that was more difficult than getting it because you had to have the right guidelines and everything. And we'll talk about that. And thirdly, I've throughout my career been a grant reviewer, primarily at the federal, state, and foundation levels. I look forward to conversing with you. I understand this is indeed a conversation, not a teaching directly experience today. We'll have that later. So I'm going to be sharing some of the little tips that I've picked up over the last 35 years, 2 or 3 here and there, okay? Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And so, Sarah, we are just going to go ahead and launch into your area of expertise. Again, for those who just joined us, please go ahead and put your title and organization that you're representing in the chat, just so we know that you are here, and we can maybe let the panelists know so they know who the audience is. I've seen Climb CDC join, our Mother of Sorrows, Jobs for Mississippi. I don't see where Geneva put her in here, but I know Geneva very well, and I'm glad that she's here. Mississippi Center for Autism, Impact Education and Housing Development, and SOS Boat People, Neighborhood Home Solutions. So those are some of the wonderful, More Community House. Those are some of the wonderful people that we have on today here to learn from you, Habitat for Humanity. If you have any questions for the panelists, please go ahead and put Anchored Heart Community, Youth Build at Climb CDC. Go ahead and start putting your questions here or in the Q&A. And Sarah, I'm going to go ahead and prepare your slides if you want to kind of tee it up.
Perfect. Okay. Well, welcome again, everybody. As Angie mentioned, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat room. And if I don't see them right away, we'll be sure to get to them before. And so just a really short slide deck for you today. And some of this is intended to be, you could use as handouts. So let's see, did we lose it?
Yeah, there we go. You got it. Can you see it?
Yes, there we go. Perfect. Okay, so these are what I call the building blocks of community development, grant writing. And these are the things that before you even put your package together. So yes, that second slide, perfect. You really want to make sure that you're able to check as many of these boxes as possible, if not every single box. It's really good to have a person on staff. I know I've worked in nonprofits. I know you're wearing, 50 different hats, but it's very, very good to have somebody dedicated to each one of these kind of silos to make sure that you not only are checking the boxes, but that you're kind of reevaluating every single year. Do we need new policies? Do we need, a new conflict of interest policy, a new board recruitment plan? Are we well served by the technology we already have in place? So again, we're not going to spend too much time here today, but I wanted to kind of leave you with that. So on the next slide, you will see a list of items very similar to what I provide to my clients. So Angie, you can move to that next one, please.
I am trying it.
And it's the list of what I would consider to be,
This one?
let's see, the third one. After that one, please. It's a list of items that you'll need. The only thing that I would, okay, let's see. So that your IRS determination letter, most of these things, many of you have had and probably are using. I think, and I would like to hear also, I'm sure Dr. Fletcher will address this, but I think that it's really, really important to remember that some of these things are just basic staples. So kind of your grant in the box that you will recycle almost for every opportunity you'll ever apply for. And those of you that have been successful with grant funding, I'm sure you're already doing this successfully. It is very important, though, to make sure it's obvious to the reviewers, I think, when you're just dusting off an old application and kind of minimally tweaking it to sort of make it fit the guidelines for another opportunity. So it is really important, although these are your sort of foundational documents, to make sure that your budgets, things of that nature, even sometimes the staff bios, you might tailor a bit for each opportunity. If it's something, specific to one area of community development, you really want to make sure that you're playing up your very best track record specific to that opportunity. I think the most underrated of these would be evidence of community partnership and collaboration. That's really key for me. I always try to make sure my clients have that one on their radar, because funders like to see that, nonprofits aren't working in silos. Oftentimes they're funding different nonprofits within a region. And I think they like to see, or, think of themselves as sort of catalysts of greater impact by connecting the dots, kind of doing some asset mapping. So be aware of who other nonprofits are in your region and how you might find ways to collaborate. And some of you I know are already doing that very successfully. So the next slide, the third slide, is where to find, or fourth slide, I'm sorry, is where to find grants. So we can advance to the next one, please. And so my two go-to areas, which I'm sure all of you are probably familiar with already, but if not, just a quick review. Grants.gov is the biggest, the only really federal clearinghouse. You can search a few different ways. Once you're into grants.gov, you can type in your, keywords, a CFDA, an opportunity number, if you know the proposal that you're looking for. It's just a real repository of great information. You can look up copies of old grants. You can see who's been funded successfully, what the average expected awards are going to be. And certainly, make sure that you fit all the guidelines. The second one on the foundation side, and there are different clearinghouses that you can use. I use GrantWatch. It's a paid subscription service. I like that one. I find it's very comprehensive. Sometimes they have federal opportunities, but mainly it's foundation side. And here again, you can search a few different ways. You may already be using this, but you can type in your program area, a region, a state, a grant amount, different things. It's really good for research. I will mention quickly for federal systems registration, or if any of you are sort of more on the startup side of the nonprofit industry, it's very, very important that early on in the process, you have a DUNS number, you complete your SAM registration, that's System for Award Management. The grants.gov registration and the SAM registration are inextricably linked. So if you have expired credentials or an error with one system, you will have an error with both systems. And unfortunately, every year we have people call at the last minute and say, I can't submit my grant. And so, I've started to take on that role for most clients, but it's very important to have a point person within your organization who is usually called the Authorized Organizational Representative, the AOR, and that you really have these registrations on your calendar so that you're renewing them 2 days or a week before they're even due, so you don't run into any unpleasant surprises when it comes time to submit your grants. So just basic stuff. On the next slide, we, assuming we're now ready to submit our grant, we want to clearly identify the project for which we're applying. It's increasingly the case, at least in my experience, that very few grant makers want to fund your operations year after year after year. And I think that's, always to some extent been the case, but maybe become even more of a trend over the past, decade. It seems like more and more funders are really looking to see some sustainability. They want to help you build your internal capacity. So usually there's a piece of the grant that you can carve off for your operations, but it's really mainly project-based. And here, this is a really, really important distinction that many of you probably already know, but just in case, the difference between a grant-funded project and a grant program. And a grant project has a defined start and end date. It has a defined project budget. It has defined project staff, even if it's 1/2 a full-time employee, a quarter time of our CFO, and 1/10 of the time of our executive director. And we could spend a whole week just talking about that. But I think, 9 times out of 10, when I see, I have a new client and I want to see the good, the bad, the ugly, all the grants they've ever applied for before, including the ones that haven't been funded, this tends to be an area where I can say, this is exactly why, in many cases, this didn't get funded. You're asking for ongoing operational expenses, which are, either clearly prohibited, or you can kind of look at what has been funded in the past and see that that's not really what we're looking for. So here's an example for you between a project and a program. I was on a board for a food pantry, which had only one program to distribute food to indigent individuals, right? When I was on the board, as a new board member, I saw we were missing many opportunities to generate grant dollars because this was a very narrow, although it was a very broad focus, there weren't a whole lot of grants out there for that one thing. However, I knew just from working in the nonprofit world that there are an awful lot of grants out there for different sort of pieces of what our mission overlapped with. So for instance, we served a lot of homeless people and elderly, and I knew that there were a lot of grants out there specifically to benefit homeless people and elderly. So we developed a special project to seek grant funding for clients who suffered exceptionally high rates of, hypertension, diabetes, obesity. Many many conditions that aren't well served by canned goods and maybe heavily processed boxed foods. So the idea was, let's pitch a piece of what we're doing as a project and have a special project for healthy food for senior citizens. So, let's try to get some grants to do what we're already doing. This pays for something that we're already paying for, but we're carving off a piece of our overall mission for this one little project. And in so doing, we can, allocate staff time and budgets to make that happen. So when we really had this sort of paradigm shift with the board members who started thinking, oh, well, could this be a project? And could this be a project? Yes, anything could be a project. So it's just a different way of looking at things, maybe. And I know many of you are probably already doing this successfully. But I would, the next sort of step of that, once you kind of are starting to think about all of your programming on a project level, the next step would be creating concept papers, which you don't have to do. I find it's a really important step for many nonprofits. It's a summary of the program, the resources available that you need to make this project successful, what your deliverables would be, what, the inputs and outputs. And that way, whenever, I don't know how many of you, I'm sure at some point, have had to put together like Gantt charts, different things, for grants. This is a really helpful starting point.
Okay. Sarah, is a concept paper basically someone can help shape the narrative of what they want the grant for? And what are some of the pitfalls that people create in this? What do they miss most often in creating and telling their story?
Sure. So I think and we'll get to this in a minute too, but I think another really big one tends to be using data to tell your story, which is terrific, but it's not always who has the saddest story, what I like to call the saddest story. You're all working in nonprofits. It's very hard, as a reviewer, to compare solving the problem of hunger to providing, economic opportunity in the form of jobs to any of the other, millions of things that you do probably on a daily basis. So everyone has a sad story. And what I mean by that, though, I think that we have to change the way we think about things a little bit as nonprofits and use facts to present your case, but really, in my experience, impact wins awards. So here is the need. Many times you've been invited to apply for a proposal because, the grant, the funder knows that you are doing good work, but what are you actually doing? What is their grant going to enable you to do? How are you helping people become self-sufficient? All of these things are the types of things that I think separate good grant applications from great ones that will be funded. So, again, some of these things are just itty bitty, but a concept paper can be used as a tool for your board to kind of make their elevator speech. If somebody asks them, what does your nonprofit do? Well, here's one of our project areas. This is what we do. Maybe you'd like to support it. This is, the budget we're looking for this year on an annual basis. These are our deliverables. Just very helpful. And if you ever have to create, the dreaded logic model, again, that could be its own topic for a week, but many grants will require what's called a logic model, and it makes grant writers and and nonprofit staff members pull their hair out because it's very, very involved. I know some of you have probably done them before. You have to have your inputs and your outputs and your staff and your deliverables, and it's all got to be very, very aligned. And this concept paper is sort of taking a step back, and it's forcing your staff and board to kind of get to the point where you've already covered all of your bases. So when it comes time to do these logic models, you're not creating something from scratch. You might be fine-tuning something that you've had from last year or 2 years ago.
Anthony, you have something?
Awesome. Yeah, Ms. Sarah, you just hit on a great point. From a reviewer standpoint, the one thing that I don't like to see when I'm reviewing a grant application is I'm not looking for the saddest story. And so often we find organizations that want to tell us that sad story, but then they don't put any statistical data about how many individuals in that situation did you help. So we're not looking for this saddest story, but we want you to tell a complete story and support it with data that shows how many people in that bucket did I impact. Because the bigger the impact, the more chance you have of winning that particular award. So great comment, great feedback. I see several questions in the chat box asking about, will we be able to get Ms. Sarah's slides? And we are going to try to provide those to everyone post presentation. So
Or at
thank
least-
you. Great point. Back over to you, Ms. Sarah.
Or at least some bullet points from that you will allow us, because there are some resources in there we certainly want to make sure that people who are on the call receive. So
Great.
next slide.
Yes, please.
Okay.
All right, so a bit more on a concept paper. And again, these are, these can be handouts, so we won't go into all nitty gritty details today. But it is, a starting point for many different things. One could be a more detailed 3-year business plan. A lot of you who are already in the weeds of grant writing know that oftentimes you're not just asked to provide 1 year of data. Some of the federal grants even want 3- and 5-year budgets, which again are very exciting to create. But if you have done the homework, then it's not like, everybody on your staff is stopping for 2 weeks while you're putting the brakes on to try and scramble to get these things. Some of these are, fundamental building blocks will kind of help you move more efficiently to seize grant opportunities. And a big part of this, having worked in nonprofits, I know it's so hard not to be reactive and opportunistic. Any good nonprofit is a little bit opportunistic, right? There could be something totally not on the radar, one time only grant opportunity that's just perfect for you. So of course you want to take that step, but to the extent possible that you've been able to kind of set some of these things up in the background, it's less stressful for the entire organization and your staff, and certainly you as you're putting this together. Okay, let's see. So moving on. Okay, moving forward again. Okay, and yes. Okay, great. So this is kind of my favorite part when I'm onboarding new clients. And I think sometimes it's easier to explain what oftentimes grant makers are not looking for, what we don't want to do. And sometimes you see light bulbs go off. Oh, this is what we've been doing a lot of the time. So I think Ashley mentioned this earlier, an incomplete application package or missed deadline. Obviously that's no good. That won't help anyone. And, sometimes I find, especially with brand new or startups, you might have the grant makers asking for 3 years of pro formas or something, or a very detailed list of board members and their bios and their terms. And you might not have all of this in front of you, and the deadline is rapidly approaching, and you think, well, we're just going to submit what we have. I would say, again, 9 times out of 10, that doesn't work. If you don't have everything you need to check every single box, it's a very easy way. Imagine yourself in the position of a grant reviewer and you're inundated. You've got 200 applications in front of you. If there are any that really just don't meet the technical standards of that you've put forth, that's a very easy way to kind of clear some off your desk. So just try to remember, if you don't have everything, maybe wait and try to, apply next go round. The status story we talked about a lot already, but focus on your impact. What are you able to do? And I can't tell you, and I'm sure Mr. Montgomery could tell you too, I've been on boards before, and it's tough because they're doing great work, but it's, like an all volunteer staff, all volunteer board operating in donated space. And so looking at the grant applications that have previously been filed, it's like, if we don't get this grant, we're not going to be able to pay our electrical bill, and we won't be able to serve any clients. And I imagine if I were a reviewer and I was looking at that type of proposal, as contrasted with one that said, we are Small Business Development Center. We are dedicating 2 full-time employees for the next year to this project. We are going to help 150 entrepreneurs connect with deployment capital to start their own businesses. We're going to provide them with professional development services, technical writing support, whatever they need to be successful. And by the way, here's our track record. This is what we've done in the past 3 years. Which would you want to fund? I think it would be natural that you would want to fund the one with a greater chance of sustainability and impact.
Right. And because the other one means that you're greatly dependent on their grant. And if you're dependent on grants from year to year, then that does not speak to sustainability.
That's exactly right. That's a great point. And I think that, by virtue of our business model, all nonprofits are probably a little bit or a lot responsible on grants from year to year, but it really is, what else are you doing? Do you have an income model that you have other maybe earned income sources? Again, not a topic for today, but a really important thing. You want to show some sustainability. This is a great way to phrase it, I find, is this is what we would be able to do without your grant funding. With your grant funding, this is what we would be able to do. So maybe we could serve 100 clients without your funding. With your funding, we're going to serve 250. And this is how we know we can do that. So anytime you're able to kind of incorporate language like that, I think it's very helpful. The next big pitfall, unclear or insufficient deliverables. Grant makers tend to really like quantifiable deliverables. So any kind of metrics that you can wrap around something, and maybe the clients are not your end product. Maybe it's we're developing this database to be able to serve our clients better, or we're going to host this whatever it is, workshop, which is going to reach 2,000 people. Think about it, from the standpoint of really trying to make sure that everything you're throwing out there has some kind of quantifiable impact that would be appealing to a grant maker. The next one, this is probably number 2 on my list of when you see grants really that have gone off the rails. This tends to be one, a biggie. So too many cooks in the kitchen. We say that for a lot of different things. In the grant world, I find that sometimes looking at old grant applications for new clients, it's very apparent that it almost looks like a chop shop. 7 or 8 different people have worked on a piece of your grant, and with varying degrees of expertise, I would say. And not everybody is going to be great at everything. The people that tend to be great at the narratives would probably make very poor CFOs and vice versa. So sometimes the person that's doing your budget may or may not be the best person to write your budget narrative. The person that has the most expertise on this particular program, maybe they shouldn't be writing that section. My best advice is have the subject matter experts. If you have the type of nonprofit where different people are involved in putting forth your grants, I would have everybody kind of put together bullet points or just little deliverables or different things, and then have one person, whether that's your executive director or your grant writer, whoever you use, tie it all together and make it really cohesive. And don't stop there. That's the first part. The second part is once it's finished, have somebody who did not write the grant proofread the entire thing for consistency and flow, and just make sure it's really cohesive. It's almost better if they don't know a whole lot about your what you're doing, your product or project, because you want to put yourself once again in the shoes of the reviewer. Is this going to make sense to the reviewer? Can they follow what we're doing? Do these impacts seem reasonable, realistic, and achievable? We spoke a lot a moment ago about.
I want to interrupt you again, because you did say this before. Why is it important to make such a distinction between program and project? And I know that you said it before, but I'd like to hear it again.
Yes, and it is important so that this really hits home. So I think many times when we're asking for funded programs, that tends to blend. It's hard. It's a lot of gray area between your ongoing program expenses and your operational expenses. So some grants will allow you to fund projects or programs, but some really do, most really do want a project. So start date, end date, here's what we're going to do in this year. A program, once again, using the example of a food pantry, your program, your ongoing program would just be feeding the indigent, right? A project might be a pilot for 2 years. We're partnering with a local, health network, and we're going to be tracking outcomes for senior citizens who are receiving fresh food as opposed to, frozen food, canned goods. We're tracking health outcomes. We're tracking, program satisfaction, project satisfaction. So anyway, it's something, and you carve your projects out of your overall program. So your program is something that you'll be doing no matter what. It's just doing business in your course of doing business as a nonprofit. It, helps us meet our mission. And a project is even a smaller building block of your program.
Have you
if that
found
makes
that one gets funded over the other, or are there just different grants that exist to support either or both?
In my experience, projects tend to get funded over programs. And I think it depends on how you pitch it. A program works. I think it's most helpful for the nonprofit to begin to think of their works on a project level basis as opposed to a program basis. So it's all about repackaging. So our programs are how we think about things as nonprofit professionals. We have these 3 programs. This is what we were created to do. These are our 3 and only programs. Our projects might be pilots, might be things to help us accomplish our work more efficiently, or we're going to try something new, or there's this grant that we're going to carve out a piece of our program and see if we can get this project funded. When we're asking for overall program support, and there are grants that fund that too, but often I find it's a little more, it makes it more indistinguishable for the nonprofit professionals to try and think about how this is going to look to the grant reviewer. So I would encourage you to really try to think about things on a project level if possible.
Okay.
And again, this is hand in hand with the seeking only organizational support. I do think, and many of you have been writing grants probably for a long time, so you're well aware of this, but there's a very effective way. Most grants will allocate a certain percentage of organizational support that they'll be willing to, but you have to really, again, repackage it in the form of a project. We're allocating 15% of our, whatever it is, credit counselor to support clients under this grant opportunity. And so you're, carving out 15% in your project narrative, and you're speaking to that. Maybe it's 15% of every staff member. So oftentimes very successful nonprofits, and some of you probably already do this, you might have 10 different grants that pay your staff members from year to year. And you've allocated staff members based on those grant projects. That's important for a couple of reasons. One, you don't have all of your eggs in one basket. There's nothing sadder than working for a nonprofit and somebody's time has come to an end because you've lost the grant funding that supports that position, right? So it's very good to diversify your funding sources, and doing things on a project level, once again, will help you accomplish that. The next one, lack of research about a grant maker's priorities, guidelines, process. That's a big one. I don't see that so often. I feel like typically when, people are so busy, if you're going to apply for it, most of the time people have done an adequate job, but it's always good to go into like a GuideStar or something like that. And you can research past grant amounts, who's been funded successfully before, what the process is. So for instance, if you're invited to submit a letter of intent and you'll be invited to the next step, and they tell you we're not going to be reviewing anything, do not send us a video or your press kit or an annual report or anything like that, don't send those things. You really want to, 99% of grant writing success is following the instructions. If you can follow instructions, you can be successful. And for foundation grants, failure to build a relationship with a funder, I think, is the biggest obstacle I've seen to successful grant funding. It's very different. Again, now in this part of my career, I'm mainly focused on federal grants where it's a pretty level playing field for anybody. If you meet the guidelines, you should have as good of a chance getting your application funded as the next nonprofit. Foundations, again, in my experience, it's been all about relationship building. And that's tough because oftentimes those program officers, as you know, they're paid to be the gatekeeper. And they're usually very effective gatekeepers. So, inviting them to come to your, grand opening or some kind of symposium you might be hosting, they may or may not do that. Oftentimes they're researching you before you're researching them, and they decide whether or not they're going to crack the door open enough to let you submit your proposal. One thing that I will say there, a successful way to kind of get around that is to really research who's been funded. So you've zeroed in on a foundation, you think it's a perfect fit for what you're doing. Look and see if there's anybody regionally or on a collaborative level, even better, that you can either reach out to and understand how they got a foot in the door if you have a good relationship, or if it's someone with whom you could collaborate. I've done this several times with a lot of success. Reach out to someone who's already being funded for a smaller amount and say, I think we could get together. We have a lot of overlap, mission overlap. Maybe we could approach the funder for a larger multi-year grant. Let's talk about how that would work. And there again, that could be its own whole workshop. But if you choose to do something like that, you would want to clearly outline everything in the form of a memorandum of agreement or understanding. But funders love that kind of thing because, again, they like to see, in many cases, that they've kind of helped connect the dots for greater impact. Okay. And finally, tips for success. And some of these I've mentioned previously, but really important. Have someone who did not work on your grant application proofread it. For consistency, take a little time, make sure it really makes sense, and that if different people worked on different parts of it, again, it's just very important that the numbers are not out of alignment with the narrative. That is a really easy way, once again, for grants to be rejected because it just simply doesn't make sense. It might be really well written. The budget, standalone budget might be great, but those two areas are not speaking to each other. Test your federal grant registration credentials early and often. There are no extensions for those types of grants. So, administrative error, even on the part of the federal systems desk, is something that's incredibly hard to prove, number one, and number two, in all likelihood, you're not going to get an extension. So sometimes if your organization is a subsidiary or has a subsidiary, the DUNS numbers could get confused in the systems registration process. I've seen applicants not be able to apply for grants because of this, because it takes months to sort this out. You have to go back to the IRS and request documentation and get things notarized, and it can be a real lot of red tape. So be sure that if you even have any federal grants on your radar, that all of this is in order. Develop a relationship with funders. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Not everyone will be welcoming and helpful, but a lot of them will. And I'm sure a lot of you are doing this already, but if you know of a grant that's coming up, try to reach out to the program officer or a board member of the foundation. Ask them about their work. Do your homework first. Make sure you're not asking questions that you can already easily find, because you could see how that might not work in your favor, but you really want to show that you know a lot about their organization and track record and the types of projects they'd like to fund, and maybe invite them if you're doing something that would be notable and an overlap with their mission. Focus on your track record, your capacity, and measurable, quantifiable deliverables. Again, not the saddest story. Increasingly, and this kind of goes with the not wanting to fund operational expenses as much as project expenses. It used to be, when I first started writing grants, I found that a lot of federal grants were more amenable to this concept of, if you give us the money, we'll build it. And if we build it, they will come. And I think that things have gotten so increasingly competitive that no longer, to me, seems to be the case as much. I find that the successful grants and applicants are the ones that have some kind of track record doing this thing that we're asking to be funded, even if it's a pilot. So it could be something that you're doing and it's a spin-off. And if you get the grant funding, you'll do it. All the same, you want to show that you have some sort of track record and capacity. Your staff knows what they're doing. You've had some good deliverables to make you feel like you can make it a success. And finally, assign staff responsibilities for reporting performance goals and measures. Again, I can't tell you the number of clients that reach out to a grant writer because maybe there's a grant that they've gotten successfully in the past, and somebody, many times for really good reasons, whether that be a natural disaster, staff turnover, things happen, as you know, and the grant reporting gets totally lost in the shuffle. And once you've kind of severed a relationship with a funder, it's incredibly hard, as you know, to rebuild that. So again, a little bit of time up front, making sure that you have some cross training of staff members. If you have one person responsible, try and make sure that there's a backup. And with that, I'm going to turn you over to Dr. Fletcher.
Well, I'm going to stay here for just a second, and this is a question that I would like for Dr. Fletcher to answer as well. Because as you were talking, I really, Ms. Joanne Nesbitt actually put put in exactly what I was going to ask, is that, you know, you talk about staff and you talk about, you know, allocating or delegating, but oftentimes people are really like a one-man show. They're either having to do it on their own, have never done grant writing before. You know, some of the things that you talked about today can really be overwhelming for smaller organizations. So I'm going to read her her question, because it's something similar to what I was going to ask as well. Like, what kind of support, what can one get? So she says, this is great information. However, for the small nonprofit just getting started, it would be overwhelming and in most cases discouraging based on the work involved in securing grants. Will there be any discussion on seed grants, or how a larger nonprofit partners with a smaller startup to secure grants? It would be great to have a workshop targeting specifically for the small startups. And we can certainly cater that for the, you know, the next two, because this is what this is about as well. I think a lot of the grants that the Impact grant with Hancock Whitney receives are smaller ones. So that's why he wanted to have this one, you know, to begin with. So we'll make sure that as we're going forward, that's great input. But please, let's stop and answer that question, because I know a lot of people that are on here today, this is very intimidating. The Duns and Sams and the, you know, and all that, you know, they take off writing, and then boom, they realize, you know, they've hit a wall. So who, I see Ashley nodding vigorously. You want to answer that?
Yes, if you don't mind, and certainly everyone else can pipe in, but the biggest answer, and to me, the biggest and best answer to that is collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. You may be starting as a 2 to 3 man shop or a 1 man, 1 woman shop, but if you have the ability to do the work, you know, whatever the impact is that you're stating you're going to be able to do, then utilize your partners, utilize your board. Your board of directors is one of your greatest assets, whether you realize it now or not. Again, that's one of the things we'll be talking about in a later session. Utilize not only their own individual talents, but also their friends and friends of friends. You have to connect the dots, and you have to utilize people in as many ways as are possible, quite frankly. Working with another organization, being able to say in your grant, I'm shadowing this organization, or this organization is going to be helping me in terms of capacity, or we're working together, we're teaming up. Those are the ways in which you're going to be able to build your own capacity, because a funder is not going to hear, I'm the only one and that's just the way it is. It can't be the way it is. You have to utilize, you know, your own networking ability to be effective. And yes, it may seem daunting, but what Sarah is not telling you guys is she was once a 1 man, 1 woman show herself, okay? And so she utilized the help of volunteers, whether it was folks within other organizations, friends, family, to get it done. But the point of the matter is, at the end of the day, it's still going to look like what she presented up front. It just may not look like that inside of the actual organization. You may have tentacles that go to other organizations and to other people, but somebody is focusing on those things no matter what. And then my other thought is, take a deep breath, right? It's going to be okay. It takes time. You're not going to jump out the gate and be 100% effective right off, but you keep building on every little success, and eventually you will get there.
Well, I know that there's like the SBA and the SBDC, you know where to go for starting up a business. Is there an equivalent organization for grant writing that as a resource?
Not that
Not
I'm
so much
aware
just
of.
utilizing your networks, as you said. Okay, I just wanted to ask that. Okay, We, Akiva
One
Scott,
of the reasons we're having this session.
that's exactly right. And this is it, that we're creating the hub. That's a great answer. Fantastic.
Angie, may I add a point to
Of course.
what's been said, particularly for the smaller organizations, because I do think they get lost in the shuffle sometimes. And if you're starting out as a small organization, I think you have to think strategically. And please know, I teach through examples. I started a nonprofit out of my church. We had no funding. We had one volunteer as the leader for that. And I knew we wanted a big grant, but it wasn't time for the big grant. So I networked and found a foundation here in Mississippi and said, would you give us a capacity building grant? It was $2,500. We took that capacity building grant of $2,500 and we used it. We got a part-time accountant. We trained our board, all of those things you do in capacity building. Then we wrote the big grant and said, we have received a grant from a local foundation to develop our capacity. I did not tell them how much. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Absolutely. Thank you for
And
that.
we got $4.5 million for
Oh.
a sex education program out of rural community here in Mississippi.
Oh my. All right, y'all. So y'all heard that tip. Thank you for that. And we're gonna transition to you next, but I do want to introduce Kiva Scott. She's the CEO of the Boys and Girls Clubs of the Gulf Coast. She is co-founder of Legacy Business League, and she is the one who writes the grants for our organization, and we've gotten them. So I think she knows what she's doing, and she's certainly pulled the Boys and Girls Club up by their bootstraps. When she joined, they were in a hole, and within a year, they were in the positive. So thank you for joining us, Kiva. Do you want to have any comments on what we're talking about now?
Sure, and thank you all for allowing me to jump in. I apologize, I was late. All of the reasons.
Nobody knew you were late, so there you go.
Well, there you have it. Anyway, so thank you, Anthony and Hancock Whitney, for this opportunity to present this. It's needed. All of us that are in nonprofit work know that it is, and so we certainly appreciate Anthony and his team and his leadership and bringing this to our community. Ms. Taylor, I enjoyed everything that you presented, and Dr. Fletcher, I'm looking forward to growing from you, and probably will be calling on you in the next coming months or so. I won't add anything that's too new, except to say that nonprofit work as it relates to grants is something that you enter into with, you make sure that this is what you want to be doing, because it is daunting and it is sometimes hard and it is a lot of work and it is a lot of information that you have to take in very quickly, because the work that you are doing is usually the most important work for the community, and the work is tough. And so essentially, and I agree, you have to partner. That's one of the things that we, preach all the time around here with our nonprofits. We're not going to get this done. There's very few dollars, and there's a whole lot of businesses saying that they can do it. And so you have to produce a whole lot of proof that you can, in fact, do it. And so, it's wise to be able to partner, because there's something that you're going to bring to the table that I may not bring to the table. And we have to be honest about that, and say, this is where my strengths are. We do youth development. I don't do mission drift with Boys and Girls Club. We are kids. If it is 4 to 18, we're your company. And we don't go into, I don't do parents. Now I have to do some parental work because I need outcomes that will last with children, and they're little. And so they don't, so if I'm trying to push financial literacy with children, I need to make sure that their parents get financial literacy. That's not me. I'm going to partner with Hancock Whitney Bank to make sure that they cover parents while I cover children. And so, but how strong is a proposal that comes in with the Boys and Girls Club, who is a very strong brand, being able to partner with Hancock Whitney Bank, a very strong brand, and say, we've provided a whole family model on family literacy right now that we can present to a funder, and they're able to look at that and say, no, I want to put my money behind that. So I just wanted to give an example of what we've all brought out today, is that definitely you have to enter, you don't enter into this unadvised. You have to, know that this is what you want to do. And then the second thing I'll say to you is to partner, and then track, be able to show these are the changes that we want to make. And then well, I can't guarantee that you'll be funded, but I know that you'll certainly rise to the top.
Thank you for that.
Yeah,
I do
great
have,
point.
I would like to ask, who is the community lending officer in the St. Petersburg, Tampa area? If you don't know the answer for that, we do want to get back to Ms. Joanne Nesbitt. And of course, if you know it, please put it in the chat. And as we go into Dr. Fletcher, would you also keep in mind, what would you do if you have a new business if you have a new business without multiple years of finances? How do you begin to tell your story then? Would somebody like to address that? Sarah, let's kick it back to you as we transition to Dr. Fletcher, because we just those who joined us from the not from the beginning, we are going to go till 10:30, so that still allows her a good 20-25 minutes to speak. But how would you handle not necessarily having any historical documentation to be able to talk about proof of performance?
So again, I would recommend two things. One, perhaps having a fiscal sponsor, looping it back to the partnership idea, maybe finding another nonprofit. If they have a relationship with your funder, so much the better. Also, it's going to be really heavily based on your projections, matched grants, anything that you have. So it's not easy, but again, any little capacity enhancing grants that you might get would be a step. And I would say partnerships and projections are going to be increasingly important.
Excellent. And if you would watch the chat, because Ms. Washington has shared some good stuff. Grants watch at a discount from TechSoup if you're a nonprofit. And Geneva Doomer, she's given some advice. Program equals the elephant. Project is how you're going to eat the elephant. I love it. Okay, so let's transition.
Yeah, also, before we transition into Dr. Fletcher, if there are topics you want us to cover in the upcoming series, please put those in the chat box and I'll be monitoring that. We have not completed the entire agenda for series 2 and 3. So we will be taking recommendations from those that are attending, and we hope that we can get all of your topics covered. One of the things I want to mention on these grants is you need to always understand the type of grant you're applying for, because a lot of times there are reimbursable grants where you have to go out and physically do the work, and then that funder will fund you once the work is completed. So it's very important that you look at the key areas in your grant writing application, but understand the grant that you're applying for as well. And one of the things that Hancock Whitney does offer is a bridge loan for certain types of grants that's reimbursable. So especially in the affordable housing arena, you may get a grant to go out and fund a project to build homes or apartments, and the grantor is not going to fund that until the project's complete. Therefore, you'll need a bridge loan to get you to start up to completion so that then you can receive that grant award. And so understand that there are reimbursable grants, and then there are grants that will award you for programs or projects, and there are a few, but not many, grants that will fund operation and support. So understand the type of grant you're looking for, and we're going to cover some more of that information in the future series. So Dr. Fletcher, you're up. Thank you very much.
And can everybody see my screen? Where it has the cover? Okay,
Yes.
Just for those who are on the call, these are the key areas that Anthony has provided to us that we want to ensure that you understand how to fill out. So summary, introduction, needs statement, objectives, outcomes, methods, key personnel, evaluation, future funding, and budget. And those are pretty consistent with other grants, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. All right, Dr. Fletcher, you're up.
Thank you very much. I could say, just take everything Sarah said and go write your proposal. But I'll see if there are tidbits that I can add to the conversation at this point. Please know that, let me forewarn you, I have a favorite philosopher. And one of the things that philosopher said many years ago, and the philosopher had an 8th grade education, he was my father. He said, there are no shortcuts to anywhere worth going. And in grant writing, that is borne out every day. There are no shortcuts. So if you don't remember anything I say today is, remember, there are no shortcuts. You got to go by the letter, and you got to do it without taking any shortcuts. Now, please know, Angie, I have tunnel vision, so I am not going to be reading this chat while I'm trying to share. So
I'm doing that for you. Don't you worry about that.
thank you very much. And please let me say that in line with my dad's philosophy, no shortcuts, I told Mr. Montgomery, it takes me 2 days to do what you're asking me to do. So he asked me to do the short version. And I didn't know the short meant 20 minutes or less. So that's why you have to get people to quantify these things when they tell you short. Short may not be real. It may be too short. But nevertheless, what I'm going to do is I'm going to forego the 156 slides that I have on proposal writing. And I'm going to focus in on a conversation about grant writing, the human part of it, and how we began to develop our capacity. And I just have a true affinity for the smaller organizations that are trying to get into this game. As a reviewer, I've reviewed the proposals that were stellar, excellent, 100%. And if you took that grant writer to that community, they would not know where they were because they knew the mechanics of writing those proposals. The flip side of that are the people who are in the trenches every day, doing the hard work, but they haven't perfected their ability to translate that onto paper in a language that the funder can relate to and therefore fund. So we have to find a way to bridge those two domains. And that's my interest in helping particularly smaller organizations find ways to bridge that. So I'm going to touch on 3 areas. And Angie, please tell me when my time is run out because I don't watch my watch either, okay? I'm going to talk about pre-development, pre-writing. There's some things you ought to do before you put finger to keyboard in relationship to writing a proposal. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about that writing process, not how you write an objective, because that's an exercise that we do, or not how you develop a logic model or a theory of change, but what are some of the factors you consider generally when you are writing a proposal? And then I want to focus a little bit on what you do after you get through writing it, because that's an important part of the process as well.
And Dr. Fletcher, what I'm going to tell you is that you go and do your thing. If people have to drop off at 10:30, they're welcome to. We have but go ahead and put your question in the chat if you have to leave, because I'm documenting those and we can get back to you with answers. So if you're on a roll, I'm not going to interrupt you. But we'll try to wrap it up. So you go ahead.
Okay. Please know my experience is born out of primarily writing to the federal level, some state in more recent years, and foundations. I'm currently doing more foundation work than I am with federal and state agencies. And they are 2 different characters, and we'll talk a little bit about them. But I want to start with the pre-writing phase of your grant development process. The first thing is most of us respond to an RFP, and you know the alphabet soup of grant writing, request for proposal. Now they call them notice of funding, and there are even some other names that you have for that. But that is that guidance that they provide you with on announcing this opportunity and telling you how to write it. Now, someone mentioned earlier the smaller organizations. I just finished writing one for a school district out of state. The guidance, that RFP was 84 pages of instruction. That's not exciting to read. So we learned that you flip through it at this point in my life, and I can say, okay, I can stop right here and know that the rest of it is what's in the Federal Register. I don't have to read all of that. But the first thing I do when there's an opportunity is to read that RFP. Well, I'm not going to read 84 pages. So what I do is I do a scan. The first thing I look for is the description of the funding opportunity. What are they funding? Why do I do that? Because I want to know if it's something that I got a track record in, I be in the organization, and that I can defend that on paper. So I read and I want to know what's your track record. What's the focus area? Then I move to the second one. Most people run to see how much money it is. I don't want to know how much money it is yet. I want to know what's your deadline. Because I don't care how much money you got. If I ain't got time to write it and write a good one, I might as not start. I should not start writing. So I want to know I got time to do a job and do it well. And I've seen some proposals written overnight. On some occasions, they've gotten funded because they did some other work that we'll talk about. But that doesn't usually work for smaller organizations. So make sure you got time to respond to it. After I know that, yep, I got a track record here. Yes, I can meet this deadline. Then I want to look at the money. How much money is budgeted for this? Now, usually we look at that and that's all we look at. No, you want to know. Someone sent me an RFP and said, that's what we want you to write us a proposal for this. And you know, we can get $132,000. And I looked at it real quick and I said, you got $132,000 to match? Because they had not read the match part. So it's important that we read and make sure that it is something that we can honor if we invest our time and effort in writing that proposal. Now, and then if everything is okay, there's no match, then I'm going to read that RFP in detail. And I'm going to take a red pen and I'm going to circle every time I see the word MUST. You must do this. You must do that. I know there's no shortcut there. I got to do that. So I'm trying to identify what I have to do. And then usually individuals start writing. I don't. The first thing, before I write the proposal, after we have a conceptual framing of that proposal, we know what we're writing for, I immediately say, who are our partners? It is not smart, ladies and gentlemen, to write a proposal in this day and age and not have partners. It's the in vogue thing, if you will. I've been around long enough when it wasn't in vogue, but it's in vogue now. You need partners. Then if it requires letters of support, when I started writing, I would do that at the end. I've learned you do that on the front end. The first thing I do is address letters of support. Who do we need letters of support from? And we take time for all of our clients. We write their letters for them because we know what we want them to say. Reviewers read letters of support. And they're looking for whether or not it's something that's very general or do they say they're going to do something specific. So we write the letters for them and we send it appropriately and say, you know, this is just for you to consider, make any necessary changes. They usually come back as sent with letterhead and a signature. So address those issues on the front end. Make sure we are following all of the instructions. I think Sarah made that point quite well. Assemble your collaborators. Make them aware of what it is that you're doing so they aren't in the cold. And when they get that letter of support that you've written for them, and we don't want to be presumptive. Please, I tell them, I'm not being presumptive, but I know you're busy. And you don't have time to be writing a lot of support letters. So please, and if you want to put them in the garbage can and start fresh, fine. But I want to be helpful. I try to make it easy for them to work with us. And then after we've done that, we need to have a sense of what it is that the funder is looking for. I never ask people, funders to give money. I ask them to partner with us, to bring their resources to this work that is being done. Speak from a position of power. You are bringing something to the table. You know how to do the work. They got the money to pay for the work. And you bring your two together. And so what you're doing is sending a message to the funder. We can help make you look good. I love making my funders look good. Why? Because when they have more money, they come back to you. I'm just saying what my experience has been. Okay, so I want my funder to look good, to be happy in everything that we do. From the time we put it on paper, I asked them, I sent a letter of inquiry to a foundation just last week. I said, we are looking for co-investors because we are investing the work. We want you to invest your resources, which, however, align with your mission. So you're helping the funder. And there's a way of framing that. So it's a win-win for everybody that's dealing with it. I've been doing this for a little while, you all. So that's sort of some of the wisdom of my years. Now, when you start writing the proposal, and again, I'm not going to get into the nuances of how to write the various sections. Let me tell you what I have seen so frequently that we really need to work on. The first portion of usually the proposal is the problem statement. Problem statement is, what is the problem? What does it look like? Who is it affecting? How many people are affected by? What are the consequences of it? That's the problem. Invariably, we will have, particularly the more novice grant writers, they will begin to tell us what they're going to do about the problem. That's not the time to tell us what you're going to do. Tell me what the problem is. Quantify it. Charts, graphs appropriately. Just focus on the problem. Too many instances we get ahead of ourselves and we start talking about the solutions. Save that for your approach, for your plan. So just keep that in mind. No, you do not, I do not encourage people to use language that you don't understand, because if you do, it's going to show up on paper. But you need to know. You need to know what is the trend in an area. I tell individuals and my clients particularly, timing is everything. For instance, there is quite a bit of equity funding right now, particularly out of foundations and the government. Well, I was speaking to a potential client and I said, you know, you could frame this within an equity framework. And they said, well, I don't know if I believe in this equity thing. I said, you're doing it. You've been doing it all the time. Boy, you know, the youth programs in our communities, they've been doing equity work all the time. They haven't been calling it that, but now people want to fund equity. So why not call it that? What you've been doing all the time. So I take time. We just finished with this client in education. We built an educational equity framework for their work that fits perfectly with what the funder said they want to fund. And we have to be able to tap into that. Employment equity. Those who are working with employment programs, you've been doing equity. Now, think of your work in that vein, because it's what you have been doing, but just somebody else put a label on it. In housing is all about equity. So that's a part of it. And one of the things we do in the workshop, because I don't want anybody using no language they don't understand what it is. I always ask to my students and I ask my clients, what will it look like when you're successful? You tell me what it will look like. And then we ought to be able to put that on paper for you in a way that your funder will understand. Moving right along. I will not talk about goals and objectives because we do that in a very deliberate kind of way. After you've done your goals and objectives, the only thing I'm gonna say about objectives is that you must have outcomes. Outcomes are results. Outcomes are changes. So you must answer the question, what will it look like when we have been successful? And if you can't answer that question, the reader go answer it for you. No, you need to put your own answer out there. I have a saying, some folks on the coast have heard me saying, change is not change until things are not the same. Change is not change until whatever you're trying to address is not the same. keep that in mind as you go forward. The other part of it is there is a move in this country right now around systemic change. If you're in advocacy, you've been pursuing systemic change all the time, changes in policies, practices, etc. So the challenge for you is not to talk about doing something new. It's about framing what you're already doing. If you are advocating for change in housing, you are pursuing systemic change. And I'm not going to lecture you. I'm going to move right on. Okay, there are a couple of tools that we need to perfect, and it is not rocket science. And don't let anybody tell you it's rocket science. And that is to know how to develop a logic model. I think Sarah mentioned the inputs and outputs. I don't call them that. How much money do you need? What you go do? What you go off, and what it's going to look like when you get finished. Now that's the logic model. And we can put the nice labels on it when we get through, but initially, I don't give you one with outputs and outputs on inputs and outputs. I want to know, what are the resources you got to have? Now, what is it you're trying to change? And how you say you go change it. Well, how you gonna know when you have changed it? That's your measurement. And then how is it gonna look when you get finished? That's a logic model and can be done by all of us, I think. So those are the little things, tidbits I would offer you in terms of the writing process. Now I'm gonna move to when you through writing your proposal, I didn't talk about evaluation, which is dearest to my heart, because you should not have to feel like you got to be an evaluation to write for a grant. No, that is not your job to be an evaluator. But evaluation information surely can help you in doing what you do best in your practice. And we include that as a part of our workshops because you need to know what are the critical questions. No, don't let anybody decide that they're gonna make you into an evaluator. No, but you know how and again, the phrase that we use is, we're gonna help you tell your story. That's what it's really about. Then you are through writing your proposal. You done told them about your staff. And let me point this out. Someone asked the question earlier. What if you don't have that track record? When we started out with this nonprofit that I referenced earlier, we captured the volunteer time and effort and the expertise. We had a nurse practitioner that was doing some health stuff in the community out of this particular church. We had some other individuals in criminal justice that were doing all of that. We captured that and said, these are the things that we did when we had no funding. Now we are asking you to invest in that initial work, and because we want to expand upon it. So again, that's a way of beginning to think about, how do I create a track record? I serve on a number of nonprofit boards, and I tell them, they get tired of hearing me say, it hasn't happened till it's reached the paper. Until it's reached your document in your computer now. Write it down, document what you're doing so that you can create a track record, but we all know that. Lastly, we are to the post-award phase. What do we do at that level? Let me just add one other thing. Before we're at that level. You have written your proposal. No, I recommend you do it on the front end rather than rear end. When you start writing, I used to tell all of my clients, call the person, the program officer usually at the funder, and ask questions. And the number of people in the workshop said, well, what am I gonna ask her? I don't know, make up a question. The purpose is to establish contact, your name identity, your organization, so that when that document comes into that funder's office, they'll say, oh, that's the lady that called me and asked me such and such a thing. Oh yeah, she just happened to mention that they have been working with ... You want to establish some identity with the funder. If you can do it gently, I call them do soft touch. You know, just find questions, and hopefully they are substantive questions that will help you in the process. You need to know that. The other thing you need to know in the age of technology is you need to go on that funder's website periodically and see if there have been any addendums added. Just an example, just last month, there was a deadline for a grant we were working on for a client that was for April the 15th. And we were in good shape to make that deadline. When we had the bad weather and the outage in Texas, the agency moved that deadline to May 15th. We were on the 14th trying to get the proposal out of here and went to the website only to discover we got another month. The lesson there is check the website periodically to see if they have added any updates. Of course, we got to tweak that proposal and do some more stuff to it that we really felt we hadn't had time to do. Now, you through writing the proposal. My recommendation is this. Well, this is what I do, I should say. I take that proposal and I put it on the shelf for 24 hours. I don't look at it. I don't have anything to do with it for 24 hours before I give it to that client. Why? Because I need to step away from it, come back fresh, and read it one last time. And you'll be amazed. There were instances where I've said, oh my gosh, was I asleep when I wrote this? Or had I had too much wine when I wrote that? You know, you step away from it and come back to it before I release a document to a client, because I want to do the best language. And because sometimes we become so enmeshed in the writing process that we just lose focus because we're trying to do what the funders say do, and we not focus on telling our story. And it should be your story. Yes, it should fit with what the funder wants. But I'm not interested in telling the funder story. I'm interested in telling your story so that the funder sees himself in that story.
Fantastic.
Lastly, we're on record, so I have to say this carefully. Once you've submitted that proposal, and please know, I am not going to use the L word, but because nonprofits cannot do that, right? You know, but I surely can be courteous and kind and generous and send my legislators a copy for their information. Because you want them to be informed about the work you're doing in their district. And we are therefore sharing with you this proposal that we have prepared and forwarded to such and such an office. I hope you hear me. Please don't say I'm telling you to go out and lobby. I'm not. I'm telling you to be strategic. And that's how it's done, you all, in the larger world, okay? So it's important. When we were preparing this recent submission to the Department of Education, we submitted a letter to the legislator. They called us back and said, we think this letter can be stronger. We want to be more specific. I said, have a way at it. And they did. And we hope that sends them, that they read those letters, you all, because where do they get their funding from? The legislators. So they pay attention. And if you ask them and you not go ask them and you sure not go tell them I said it, you will, they would say, oh no, that has nothing, no bearing whatsoever. That's fine. That's very fine. But be courteous and share your legislators with a copy of your proposal when you submit it, just for their information. Now you can't do that with foundations. That's for government funding. The last thing is, for those of us who are submitting, particularly federal, they have changed. They now have Workspace. I literally know nothing about Workspace and do not plan on learning because that's not my area. I write, I don't submit. But I tell funders, give yourself at least, I tell them a week, but usually they can't hit it in a week. You need 3 days to submit because it can kick back. Your DONS number wasn't right. You had a DONS number, but it had expired and you had forgotten to renew it. All kinds of things can happen. So make sure you submit your proposal early. Do the webinars on our workspace. And if you can't do that, if you're a small organization, just look for someone over in another organization that has done it. Again, the one we submitted the other day, last week, they ended up going and consulting with somebody for 2 days just to do their submission for them. It was worth their time. It was a $1.8 million proposal.
Oh.
Okay,
Yeah.
fine.
Well, we are at time, but I want to tell everybody who can stay, please stay. Those who can't, I want to thank you for joining us. And we are going to post this to give us a couple of days to download this and post it to Legacy Business League's, legacybusinessleague.org. We'll have and we also have a YouTube channel, and we'll put it there. I'll send the link to Anthony, and he can send it out to his friends, family, cousins, coworkers, anybody who wants to watch it, and those who have applied before and might not have been successful. Hopefully this will be some good tips, but I don't want to cut you off if there are some other items that you want to contribute. I do think that we've extracted some very significant topics for our upcoming series. I think one being the logic model. We've had a couple of people ask for some examples of that in the chat. I bet you we can cover that and show some examples of that on the next one. We also have some people talking about the research format in writing grants. So I've captured these questions, and I think that is going to help us develop the upcoming topics. Ms. Fletcher, do you have any closing remarks? Is there anything that you want to tell us?
I got 1 minute.
Yes, ma'am. Again,
Okay.
those who can stay, please do. Those who can't, including panelists. I mean, again, panelists, this is your time. We want to be sensitive to it. But I tell you, when you have somebody like these folks on, you don't really want to cut them off, do you? So, and that's why we extended it to a series so that, we can take this time to flesh it out. If we'd done, 2-3 hours here today, we still would have had to cut people off. But now we can anticipate your needs and kind of cater to the concept. So please continue.
I looked through them. I've touched on, it's my 10 commandments, but I've touched on them in one form or another. I didn't mention budget. Please do your budget on a spreadsheet because your budget ends up being accurate. But my bonus, and we will do this subsequently in a fuller workshop, she or he who submitted not a proposal shalleth not get funded.
Say that again.
She or he who submitted not a proposal shalleth not get funded.
And meaning
Awesome.
you can't win if you don't play.
That's right.
Thank you.
And Dr. Fletcher, I'd like to thank you and Ms. Taylor for making this an excellent presentation. And yes, we did ask Dr. Fletcher to cut back her 2-day presentation, and we're going to get about a 30 to 40 minute part of that over the next 2 series. So yes, Dr. Fletcher, I'd like you to start off the next series with your 10 commandments and talking about budgets and some of those areas that are near and dear to your heart. We greatly appreciate your participation. We greatly appreciate you, Ms. Taylor, as well, and all of the panelists, Ms. Scott. And I'm going to kick it back over to Ms. Angie so she can give us our closing remarks.
Well, thank you so much. And you know what? Going 6 minutes over for people who usually do this for multiple days, really, I think that it's a hit. And we definitely had some wonderful organizations on. I hope that you'll be able to join us in the future. If for any reason that you're able to ask real-time questions, we do had a lengthy submission by someone that starts with the name of G in the chat. I will try to get these back in because they gave some great pointers in addition to making sure that you partner with an experienced CPA. And not all groups qualify for the 501c3, so on and so forth. So thank you again for all the panelists. Like I said, we're going to customize our next agenda based on we've tried to tell you a little bit about telling your story today. The next one will be proving outcomes with some of the tweaked a little bit so we can cover some of your needs. And then the last one will be justifying your finances. I bet you that's going to be a doozy. That's about the budget. Not only do you put it in a spreadsheet, there's very specific things that you have to outline and make sure that it all makes sense. So we're going to wrap it up for today. I do appreciate everybody's participation and looking forward to the upcoming series.
All right.
Thank
Thank
you so
y'all. Have
much.
a great day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.